The stars stretched endlessly across the black canvas of space, their cold light flickering like whispers from ancient times. On the bridge of the Eternal Spear, the flagship of the Kleindorian Empire, Commander Vyrek stood motionless, his crimson skin glowing faintly under the dim, pulsating lights of the control room. The air was thick with tension, though the crew dared not show it. Before them, suspended in the void, floated a strange and ancient object, a beacon. It spun slowly, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer when viewed too long. The faint blue glow of its crystalline structure pulsed in rhythm with the signal it emitted, a warning that had traveled through space for millennia. Do not approach the Solaris system. Beware the humans. Vyrek's golden eyes narrowed as he studied the object. A smirk curled the edges of his lips, revealing sharp, ivory teeth. His forearms crossed over his broad chest, his posture exuding both arrogance and curiosity. Humans, he said, his voice low and disdainful, yet laced with amusement. Primitive creatures. I have crushed empires and bent entire systems to my will. Why should I fear a species barely capable of leaving their own planet? The bridge was silent, save for the hum of machinery and the faint crackle of the beacon's signal. The crew exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Only Dr. Reiner, the science officer, dared to speak. His voice was measured, yet there was a tremor beneath it. Commander, this is the 7th beacon we've encountered. All of them carry the same warning. These messages, they are not random. Their craftsmanship suggests they were created by the Erythrians, an ancient race that vanished over 10,000 years ago. They were known for their knowledge of the cosmos, their wisdom unmatched. Vyrek turned to face him, his smirk deepening into a sneer. The Erythrians? A race of ghosts. Their wisdom did not save them, did it? Dead civilizations leave behind ghost stories, Reiner. Stories to frighten the weak and the superstitious. Reiner hesitated, his clawed hands gripping the edge of his console. He wanted to argue, to insist that the warnings were more than stories, but the weight of Vyrek's authority crushed his courage. Instead, he lowered his gaze and nodded. As you say, Commander. Vyrek turned back to the main viewport, where the beacon continued its slow, hypnotic rotation. Its light bathed the bridge in an eerie glow, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the walls. Plot a course for the Solaris system, he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. I want to see these so-called humans for myself. The crew hesitated for a fraction of a second before springing into action, their hands flying over control panels as they obeyed the command. The air grew heavier, as if the ship itself understood the gravity of the decision. The beacon's light seemed to pulse faster, almost as if it were reacting to their intent, a final, desperate attempt to dissuade them. But Vyrek was unmoved. His mind was set, his pride unshakable. To him, the warnings were nothing more than the remnants of a forgotten past, irrelevant in the face of his empire's might. And yet, deep in the recesses of the ship, where the hum of engines drowned out all else, a quiet unease began to stir. The stars outside seemed to shimmer more brightly, as if they too were watching, waiting. The Eternal Spear turned toward the distant Solaris system, its engines roaring to life. The beacon, now left behind, continued its lonely vigil, spinning endlessly in the void, its warning unheeded. The red sands of Mars stretched endlessly beneath the pale, dusty sky, their surface shimmering faintly under the weak sunlight. On the edge of this barren world stood Ares Station, a human outpost clinging to the lifeless terrain like a stubborn survivor. Inside its labyrinth of metal corridors and humming machinery, Elena Marquez, an engineer, was perched precariously on a platform, adjusting a malfunctioning solar array. Her fingers, calloused from years of work, moved deftly over the tools in her hand, tightening bolts, and reconnecting wires. The faint hum of the station's systems was the only sound, a constant reminder of the fragile line between survival and the harsh vacuum outside. Suddenly, her COMM unit crackled to life, breaking the monotony. The voice of her colleague, Derek Hahn, came through, tense and urgent. "Elena, you need to see this." The tone of his voice sent a chill down her spine. Derek was not one to panic, and the weight in his words made her pause. Quickly securing the array, Elena climbed down from the platform, her boots clanging against the metal grating as she hurried back into the station. The airlock hissed as it sealed behind her, and the cool, recycled air of the station greeted her with a faint metallic tang. She found Derek in the observation dome, a circular room with wide, reinforced windows that offered a breathtaking view of the stars. But Derek wasn't admiring the beauty of the cosmos. He was hunched over a console, his face illuminated by the flickering light of the monitors. His expression was grim, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a tightness around his eyes. "What is it?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite a knot forming in her stomach. Derek didn't look up. He simply pointed to the screen. Elena leaned over, her dark eyes scanning the data. At first, it didn't make sense: spikes in energy readings, unusual movements in the outer system. Then she saw it, a cluster of massive energy signatures near Jupiter. Her breath caught in her throat. "Massive ships," Derek said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 47 of them. They're not ours." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Elena stared at the screen, her mind racing. The readings were unmistakable. These weren't human vessels. The size, the energy output, it was far beyond anything Earth had ever built. A cold dread settled in her chest, spreading like ice through her veins. "Have you sent the data to Earth?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Derek nodded. "Already done. Admiral Victor Hayes is calling an emergency meeting." Elena exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. 47 ships, what could they want? Why now? She turned her gaze to the observation window, her eyes searching the endless blackness beyond. Somewhere out there, near the swirling storms of Jupiter, an unknown fleet was moving closer. The thought of it made her feel small, insignificant, like a speck of dust in an infinite void. The station's lights flickered briefly, a reminder of their isolation on this desolate planet. For a moment, Elena felt the weight of the universe pressing down on her. Humanity had always looked to the stars with curiosity and wonder, dreaming of what lay beyond. But now, faced with the reality of an unknown presence, that wonder was replaced by fear. "We've always known we weren't alone," she said softly, more to herself than to Derek. "But I didn't think, not like this." Derek glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We need to be ready." Elena nodded, her jaw tightening. The monitors continued to display the ominous energy signatures, their movements steady and deliberate. The Kleindorian fleet was approaching, and with each passing moment, the distance between them and humanity grew smaller. In a dimly lit war room deep beneath the surface of Earth, Admiral Victor Hayes stood like a statue, his broad shoulders squared and his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery and the occasional beep of a monitor. Around him, officers and analysts worked feverishly, their faces pale under the cold, artificial light. The holographic display in the center of the room projected the unmistakable image of the Kleindorian fleet, a vast swarm of ships, their energy signatures glowing like fireflies in the void. They were coming. Admiral Hayes studied the data with the practiced calm of a man who had seen too much. His weathered face, lined with scars both physical and emotional, betrayed no fear. His gray eyes, sharp and calculating, moved over the hologram with precision, taking in every detail. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed indifferent, but those who knew him understood the truth. Hayes was a storm contained within a man, his mind already racing through 1,000 strategies, weighing every possibility. "This is not a drill," he said, his voice low but unyielding, carrying the weight of command. "Activate Protocol Omega." The room froze for a heartbeat. Protocol Omega. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was a name whispered in the darkest corners of Earth's military hierarchy, a contingency plan so secret that most dismissed it as a myth. But now, the time for secrecy was over. Across the planet, hidden facilities buried deep beneath mountains, oceans, and deserts began to stir. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, where sunlight had never touched, massive doors carved into the seabed rumbled open. From within, ancient ships emerged, their sleek, angular forms glistening with condensation as they rose to the surface. These vessels, relics of a forgotten age, had been built in secret, their existence known only to a handful of people. Their engines roared to life, sending ripples through the water as they ascended into the sky. On the moon, craters that had long been dismissed as natural formations began to shift. The ground trembled as massive panels slid apart, revealing concealed weapons cannons and missile silos that had been dormant for centuries. The weapons hummed with energy, their targeting systems locking onto the approaching fleet with eerie precision. The moon, long thought to be a barren wasteland, was now revealed to be a fortress. Even in the heart of Earth's cities, ordinary buildings hid extraordinary secrets. Skyscrapers retracted their facades, revealing anti-aircraft turrets and defensive shields. Subterranean bunkers, thought to be relics of the Cold War, were suddenly alive with activity as soldiers and scientists prepared for the unthinkable. Humanity's true strength, hidden for so long beneath the facade of mediocrity, was finally awakening. In a secret laboratory hidden beneath the Arctic ice, Dr. Malin, a physicist of unparalleled brilliance, stood before her team. The room was bathed in an otherworldly blue light, emanating from the crystalline core of a massive ship that loomed behind her. Its surface was smooth and metallic, pulsating faintly as if it were alive. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made every breath feel heavier. Dr. Lin, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid, placed her hand on the console before her. Her eyes, sharp and determined, reflected the glow of the ship's core. "Wake the Ark-class ships," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "It's time." Her team moved quickly, their hands flying over controls as the room filled with the sound of whirring machinery and rising energy. The Ark-class ships, humanity's last line of defense, had been designed in secret, their technology centuries ahead of anything the world had ever seen. They were massive, towering constructs capable of bending the laws of physics themselves. For decades, they had slumbered in their icy tombs, waiting for the moment they would be needed. Now, their time had come. As the first Ark-class ship began to stir, its core flaring to life, a deep, resonant hum filled the laboratory. The ground trembled as the ship's systems awakened, its engines roaring like a caged beast. The walls of the lab seemed to vibrate with the raw power emanating from the vessel. Dr. Lin stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of it was almost overwhelming. Across the planet, humanity's hidden strength was revealed piece by piece. The world that had once seemed vulnerable, fractured, and unprepared now stood as a fortress, its defenses rising like a sleeping giant roused from its slumber. The Kleindorian fleet, so vast and imposing, was no longer approaching a helpless prey. It was heading straight into the jaws of a predator that had been waiting, watching, and preparing for centuries. And as the Ark-class ships began to emerge from their icy prisons, their towering forms casting long shadows over the frozen landscape, a single thought echoed in the minds of those who had worked tirelessly to make this moment possible. Humanity was ready. The Kleindorian fleet glided silently into the Solaris system, their colossal ships casting long shadows over the distant, frozen planets. The vessels were sleek, black monoliths, their surfaces shimmering faintly with alien energy. They moved with an eerie grace, their formation precise and unyielding, like predators closing in on their prey. The void of space seemed to hold its breath as the fleet passed the gas giants, their swirling storms of color reflected faintly on the hulls of the invaders. On the bridge of the Kleindorian flagship, a vast chamber of cold metal and dim, pulsating lights, Vyrek, the Supreme Commander, stood before the main screen. His tall, imposing figure was wrapped in a flowing, dark robe adorned with symbols of his rank. His face, angular and sharp, bore an expression of calculated hunger as his piercing, golden eyes locked onto the image of Earth displayed before him. The planet hung in the void like a jewel, its blue oceans and green lands vibrant against the blackness of space. A blue-green world, Vyrek murmured, his voice a low growl that echoed through the silent chamber. It looks rich. Fertile. A perfect prize. His lips curled into a predatory smile as he turned to his officers. Prepare the fleet for planetary conquest. This world will kneel. As the Kleindorian ships edged closer to Earth, they began intercepting transmissions, faint, fragmented signals carried on invisible waves. Vyrek listened as snippets of human voices and music crackled through the air, distorted and primitive. He sneered, his expression one of disdain. Radio waves, he scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. These creatures are barely out of their caves. They are nothing. His officers chuckled softly, their confidence bolstered by the apparent simplicity of their target. But as the fleet drew nearer, the arrogance in the room began to falter. The ship's sensors, once flawless, started to flicker and glitch. Data streams became erratic, and readings on Earth's surface blurred into static. Vyrek's smile faded, replaced by a frown of irritation. "What is this?" he barked, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Why are the sensors malfunctioning?" Before anyone could answer, the main screen shifted, and a new image appeared, one that froze the room. From the depths of Earth's oceans, massive shapes began to rise. The water churned violently, white foam spraying into the air as hidden ships emerged, their dark, angular forms glistening with seawater. They were enormous, their hulls scarred by time but bristling with weaponry. The ocean itself seemed to tremble as these leviathans ascended, their engines roaring to life. On the moon, craters long thought to be dormant began to shift and open, revealing hidden silos and launch bays. Sleek, silver vessels shot out like arrows, their thrusters leaving trails of light as they joined the growing fleet above Earth. The Kleindorians watched in stunned silence as the illusion of Earth's weakness shattered before their eyes. At the center of this sudden display of power was the Erebus, Earth's flagship. It was a monstrous vessel, larger than any of the others, its black, angular hull a stark contrast against the stars. The ship seemed to radiate menace, its surface bristling with weapons that glowed faintly with a cold, blue light. It moved to the front of the human fleet, a silent declaration of defiance. Inside the Erebus, President Lana Gray stood in the command center, her presence commanding and unshakable. Her silver hair framed a face etched with both wisdom and determination. Around her, officers worked with precision, their movements quick but controlled. The tension in the room was palpable, but Lana's voice, calm and resolute, cut through it like a blade. "To the people of Earth," she said, her voice transmitted to every corner of the planet, "remain calm. We have prepared for this day. We are not alone, and we are not defenseless. Her words carried a weight that steadied the hearts of billions. Across cities and towns, people looked to their screens, watching as Earth's hidden fleet revealed itself to the universe. Fear mingled with awe, but above all, a spark of hope ignited. Lana turned her gaze to the main screen, where the Kleindorian fleet loomed like a storm on the horizon. Her voice hardened, carrying the fire of humanity's resolve. To the Kleindorians, she declared, her tone unwavering, Earth does not surrender. Back on the Kleindorian flagship, Vyrex's golden eyes narrowed as he watched the human fleet assemble. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by a simmering rage. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms as he stared at the Erebus, the symbol of Earth's defiance. So, he muttered, his voice low and venomous, the prey has teeth. The Kleindorian fleet began to shift, their ships forming a battle line. The stars themselves seemed to dim as the two forces faced each other, the silence of space heavy with the promise of violence. Earth's hidden strength had been revealed, and the first contact between these two civilizations would not be one of peace. The stage was set for a battle that would determine the fate of a world. The void of space erupted into chaos as the Kleindorian fleet unleashed their assault. Beams of incandescent light, searing and relentless, streaked through the darkness, aimed at Earth's newly revealed defenses. The energy crackled with destructive power, illuminating the cold expanse of the Solaris system in bursts of violent light. The Kleindorians attacked with the confidence of conquerors, their weapons designed to annihilate entire worlds, their fleet a tide of death that had crushed countless civilizations before. But this time, something was different. Earth's ships, rising like phantoms from the oceans and moon, moved in ways the Kleindorians could not comprehend. They darted and weaved, their trajectories unpredictable, as though they were alive. Just as a Kleindorian beam would find its mark, the target would shimmer and vanish, the ship phasing out of existence for a heartbeat before reappearing elsewhere. It was like fighting shadows that struck back with devastating precision. The Erebus, Earth's flagship, led the charge. Its dark hull seemed to absorb the light of the Kleindorian weapons, rendering it a looming silhouette of dread. Smaller Earth ships flanked it, their sleek designs darting forward like wolves circling a massive predator. The humans' counterattack was swift and merciless. Beams of energy and projectiles of unknown composition tore through the Kleindorian shields as if they were paper. Explosions rippled across the enemy fleet, silent in the vacuum of space but no less terrifying. Shattered debris spun away from the wreckage, glinting like shards of glass in the starlight. On the bridge of the Kleindorian flagship, Vyrex stood frozen, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. The calm, calculated predator was gone, replaced by a creature grappling with the impossible. His claws scraped against the metal railing as he leaned forward, staring at the devastation unfolding before him. What is this?" he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "These primitives. How?" The answer came in the form of the Erebus's main cannon. The weapon, a marvel of human ingenuity and desperation, began to charge. The air around the ship seemed to distort, warping, and bending as an invisible force gathered at its core. The cannon didn't fire with the blinding light of traditional weapons, instead, it emitted a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of space. Vyrex's sensors screamed warnings, but before he could give the order to evade, the Erebus fired. A ripple of energy surged forward, not a beam, but a distortion, a manipulation of gravity itself. The nearest Kleindorian cruiser, a massive, angular ship bristling with weapons, was caught in the weapon's path. For a moment, it seemed to freeze in place, its hull groaning under the strain of an unseen force. Then, with a horrifying inevitability, it began to collapse inward. The cruiser's massive frame folded like paper, crumpling into itself as though crushed by an invisible hand. The light from its engines flickered and died, and then, in an instant, it was gone, reduced to a singularity, a pinprick of darkness that devoured everything around it before vanishing into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. Vyrex's officers stared at their screens, their faces pale with shock. The Supreme Commander's claws dug into the railing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Impossible," he roared, his voice echoing through the bridge. He turned, his golden eyes blazing with fury and fear. No species should have this level of technology. Not them. Not humans. But the evidence was undeniable. Earth's fleet was tearing through the Kleindorian armada with a ferocity and precision that defied all logic. Ships that had once been symbols of Kleindorian dominance now drifted as lifeless husks, their shattered remains a testament to humanity's unexpected strength. The battlefield was a graveyard, littered with the debris of a once invincible fleet. On the Erebus, President Lana Gray watched the battle unfold from the command center. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed the weight of the moment. She knew what this victory would cost, the lives already lost and the dangers yet to come. But she also knew what was at stake: Earth's survival, humanity's future. She stood tall, her voice steady as she addressed her crew. "Keep pushing. They thought we were weak. Let them see what we are capable of." Her words ignited a fire in the hearts of those around her. The crew worked with renewed determination, their hands flying over controls as they coordinated the fleet's movements. Across the battlefield, Earth's ships pressed their advantage, their attacks relentless. The Kleindorians, for all their power and arrogance, were being driven back. Vyrex's rage boiled over as another of his cruisers exploded in a brilliant burst of light. He slammed his fist into the console, shattering the screen beneath his claws. "Retreat is not an option," he bellowed, his voice raw with desperation. "We are Kleindorians. We do not flee from insects." But even as he spoke, he could see the truth. His fleet was crumbling, his forces overwhelmed by an enemy they had underestimated. The humans were not the primitive creatures he had believed them to be. They were something else entirely, something dangerous, something unstoppable. As the battle raged on, the stars themselves seemed to bear witness to the clash of wills. Earth, a small, fragile world on the edge of the galaxy, stood defiant against a force that had conquered countless others. And in the heart of the chaos, the Erebus loomed, its presence a beacon of humanity's resolve. The battle for Solari was far from over, but one truth was clear: Earth would not fall without a fight. And for the first time in his life, Vyrex felt the cold grip of fear. The battle tore through the void like a storm of fire and fury, the once proud Kleindorian fleet now reduced to scattered remnants of its former power. Their ships, once sleek and menacing, drifted through the battlefield like wounded beasts, their hulls scarred and broken. The Kleindorians, who had always been the hunters, now found themselves cornered, their movements restricted by an unseen force. Vyrex paced the bridge of his flagship, his golden eyes darting between the fractured reports from his officers. The air was thick with tension, the low hum of failing systems punctuated by the occasional burst of static from damaged consoles. For the first time in his long, illustrious career, Vyrex felt something alien clawing at his chest. Panic. "Why can't we retreat?" he growled, his voice sharp and venomous. "I ordered the fleet to fall back. Why aren't they obeying?" One of his officers, a younger Kleindorian with trembling hands, dared to speak. "Commander, it's the humans. They've done something to space itself. We're trapped." Vyrex froze, his claws curling into fists. "Trapped?" The word hissed from his lips like a curse. "Explain." The officer's voice wavered as he continued. "Their technology, it's manipulating gravity. Space around us is folding in ways we can't counter. Every attempt to retreat only brings us back to the center of the battlefield. It's as if they've woven a web, and we're the prey. Vyrex's lips pulled back in a snarl, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light of the bridge. This is impossible. No species should have this kind of power. His voice rose, echoing off the cold metal walls. They are primitive. They are nothing. But even as he shouted, the truth loomed over him like a shadow. The humans were not the weak, simple creatures he had believed them to be. They had hidden their strength, biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, the Kleindorian fleet, the pride of their empire, was ensnared in a trap they could not escape. Far below, on Earth, Dr. Malin stood in the control room of a vast underground facility. The walls were lined with glowing monitors, each displaying a different view of the battlefield. Her sharp eyes scanned the data, her expression calm and calculating. Around her, scientists and engineers worked with quiet efficiency, their movements precise and controlled. The air buzzed with tension, but Malin radiated an unshakable confidence. "Everything is working as planned," she said, her voice steady and measured. She turned to one of her assistants, who was watching her with a mixture of awe and nervousness. "They underestimated us. That was their greatest mistake." The assistant nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the controls. "They are completely trapped, Doctor. The gravitational net is holding. They can't escape." Malin allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Good. Let them see what happens when they underestimate humanity." Her words carried a quiet power, a reminder of the years of preparation that had led to this moment. Humanity had been underestimated for centuries, dismissed as weak and insignificant by those who believed themselves superior. But in their arrogance, the Kleindorians had overlooked humanity's greatest strength, its ability to adapt, to innovate, to rise from the ashes stronger than before. On the Kleindorian flagship, the situation grew more desperate by the second. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as systems failed one by one. Vyrex stood at the center of the chaos, his mind racing. He had always been a commander who thrived under pressure, but now, for the first time, he felt the weight of true defeat pressing down on him. "Send a message to the Empire," he barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "They need to know what's happening here. They need to send reinforcements." His communications officer, a seasoned veteran who had served Vyrex for years, turned to him with a look of grim resignation. "We can't, Commander," he said, his voice heavy. "We're being jammed. All frequencies are blocked." Vyrex's eyes widened, his fury boiling over. "Jammed? By them?" He slammed his fist into the console, the impact leaving a dent in the metal. "How is this possible? How can they be doing this?" The officer hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Their technology, it's unlike anything we've encountered. It's as if they've been preparing for us, studying us. They knew exactly how to counter our systems." Vyrex's claws scraped against the railing as he stared at the main screen. The Erebus loomed in the distance, its dark, angular form a symbol of humanity's defiance. It was like a predator circling its prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. For a moment, Vyrex felt a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. Not for himself, but for his people, for the empire he had sworn to protect. He had underestimated humanity, and now, the price of that arrogance was becoming painfully clear. "They've been hiding their strength," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "All this time, they've been waiting for us." The realization hit him like a blow. Humanity had not been weak or primitive. They had been patient. They had been watching, learning, preparing for the day when they would face an enemy like the Kleindorians. And now, that day had come. Vyrek straightened, his golden eyes burning with a mix of rage and determination. "We are not finished yet," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If they think they can break us, they are mistaken. I will not let this be the end." But even as he spoke, he knew the odds were against him. The Kleindorian fleet was crippled, their escape routes cut off, their communications silenced. The humans had turned the battlefield into a trap, and there was no way out. In the cold, unyielding silence of space, the Kleindorian Empire's greatest commander found himself at the mercy of a species he had once dismissed as insignificant. And deep within him, the fear grew, a gnawing certainty that the galaxy would never be the same again. Far across the galaxy, where stars burned cold and ancient civilizations slumbered beneath the weight of their own histories, the archivists of Lytheria stirred. These beings, older than empires and wiser than kings, had watched the rise and fall of countless species, their silent vigil unbroken for millennia. They were the keepers of knowledge, the watchers of the cosmos, and their crystalline towers stretched high into the eternal night, shimmering with the light of distant stars. In the heart of their sanctum, a great sphere of liquid light pulsed with information, a living archive of the galaxy's greatest truths and darkest secrets. The archivists, their forms translucent and shifting like mist, gathered around the sphere. Their voices, soft and melodic, wove together in a chorus of thought. They had seen the battle. They had felt the ripples of its outcome spread like a shockwave through the fabric of space. The humans had awakened. A decision was made, one that had not been enacted in thousands of years. The archivist's message, a warning etched into the very ether of the galaxy, was sent forth. It traveled faster than light, carried on waves that bypassed time and space, reaching every corner of the known universe. The message was simple, but its weight was immeasurable. Asterisk: the humans have awakened. Beware the descendants of Terra. They were once called the architects of destruction. Now they rise again. Asterisk. The words echoed in the minds of those who received them, carrying with them the weight of ancient fear and forgotten history. Across countless worlds, leaders paused, their hearts heavy with the implications. On the barren moons of the Hylax system, the insectoid queens halted their endless birthing to listen. In the floating cities of Relith, the amphibian scholars whispered the name Terra as though it were a curse. And in the dark halls of the Kleindorian Empire, the remnants of their once proud fleet shuddered at the realization that they had provoked a force they could not comprehend. The galaxy remembered. And now, it watched. The battlefield was silent now, the wreckage of the Kleindorian fleet scattered across the void like broken shards of a once mighty weapon. Fires still burned in the distance, their light flickering against the endless black of space. But the sounds of war had faded, replaced by the hum of human ships moving through the debris, not as predators, but as caretakers. On the bridge of the Erebus, President Lana Gray stood tall, her gaze fixed on the holographic display before her. The faces of her advisors surrounded her, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on her shoulders, but her voice was steady as she spoke. "We have won," she said, her tone calm but resolute. "But now, we face a greater challenge. The galaxy is watching us. What we do next will define not just this battle, but the future of humanity." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, one of her generals stepped forward, his face hardened by years of war. "We should finish them," he said bluntly. "The Kleindorians would have shown us no mercy. We can't risk leaving them alive to retaliate." Lana turned to him, her eyes sharp. "And if we do that, what does it make us, she asked. They feared us because they thought we were monsters. If we destroy them now, we will prove them right. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Slowly, one by one, her advisors nodded. Humanity had fought for survival, but now, they had the chance to choose what kind of future they wanted to build. The decision was made. Across the battlefield, human engineers began boarding the damaged Klein-Dorian ships. They moved with purpose, their tools and machines humming as they worked. Weapons systems were dismantled, stripped from the ships with precision and care. But life support systems were spared, repaired where necessary to ensure the survival of the Klein-Dorian crews. On Earth, the captured Klein-Dorian soldiers were treated with a respect that shocked even the most hardened among them. They were given food and water, their wounds tended to by human medics. Some of them, still defiant, spat at their captors, their pride refusing to bend. But others watched in stunned silence, their alien eyes wide with disbelief. One Klein-Dorian officer, his arm bound in a sling, was brought before a human commander. He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Why do you bother?" he demanded. "We would not have done the same for you." The human commander regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable. "That's exactly why," she said simply. Word of humanity's mercy spread quickly, reaching even the highest ranks of the Klein-Dorian Empire. For Vyrek, who sat in the ruins of his flagship, the news was a bitter pill to swallow. He had expected annihilation, the complete destruction of his people. Instead, he was met with something far more unsettling: compassion. "They're helping us?" he asked, his voice low and disbelieving. His second-in-command nodded. "Yes, Commander. They've disabled our weapons, but they are repairing our ships. They are even treating our wounded." Vyrek's claws tightened around the edge of his console. He couldn't understand it. Mercy was not a concept the Klein-Dorians practiced or valued. To show weakness was to invite destruction. And yet, here were the humans, offering aid to their enemies. The galaxy had feared humanity for its potential for destruction. But now, as Vyrek watched the humans work, he realized that their true strength lay not in their weapons, but in their choices. They had the power to destroy, yet they chose to rebuild. They had been wronged, yet they chose forgiveness. For the first time, Vyrek felt something stir within him, a flicker of respect for the species he had once dismissed as insignificant. As the last of the Klein-Dorian ships prepared to leave, President Gray stood on the surface of Earth, looking up at the sky. The stars above seemed brighter now, as though the universe itself was watching. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The galaxy would not forget what humanity had done, nor would it forgive easily. But she also knew that humanity had taken its first step toward something greater. "We will not become the monsters they feared," she whispered to herself, her words carried away by the wind. And as the Klein-Dorian fleet retreated, battered but alive, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what the descendants of Terra would do next. The sky above Earth was alive with a shimmer of alien ships, their battered forms now sharing the same space as the vessels of humanity. The once hostile Klein-Dorian warriors, who had descended upon the humans with fire and fury, now walked among them with hesitant steps. Their sharp, angular forms moved through Earth's bustling cities, their glowing eyes scanning the unfamiliar world with a mix of curiosity and unease. Among these warriors were those who had begun to question the empire they had served so loyally. The mercy shown by humanity had shaken something deep within them, a crack forming in the foundation of their beliefs. For generations, they had been taught that strength was absolute, that mercy was weakness, and that conquest was the natural order of the universe. But now, standing among the very people they had sought to destroy, they found themselves wondering if they had been wrong. It started small. A group of Kleindorian engineers volunteered to assist human crews in repairing damaged colonies. Their expertise in advanced technology proved invaluable, and their presence, though initially met with suspicion, soon became a symbol of something greater. Former warriors, their claws once stained with the blood of battle, now worked alongside human patrol fleets, aiding in rescue missions and disaster relief. In one such mission, a Kleindorian soldier named Ryvek stood shoulder to shoulder with a human pilot as they pulled survivors from the wreckage of a collapsed building. The cries of the injured filled the air, and Ryvek's sharp features softened as he cradled a human child in his arms. The child, too young to understand fear, reached out to touch the metallic sheen of his armor, giggling softly. Ryvek froze, the innocence of the gesture piercing through the layers of his hardened heart. Meanwhile, Commander Vyrek, once the proud leader of the Kleindorian fleet, sat in a dimly lit cell aboard the Erebus. The walls were bare, the silence heavy, but it was not the confinement that weighed on him, it was the questions. He had always believed in the strength of his empire, in the righteousness of their conquests. Yet here he was, alive, spared by the very people he had sought to annihilate. When Admiral Hayes entered the room, Vyrek's golden eyes narrowed. The human leader stood tall, his presence calm but commanding. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Finally, Vyrek broke the silence. "Why?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Why spare us? You had every reason to destroy us. Every right." Hayes met his gaze, his expression unreadable. He stepped closer, his hands clasped behind his back. "Because true strength," he said slowly, his voice steady, "lies in knowing when not to use it." Vyrek's claws tapped against the metal table, his mind wrestling with the words. He had always equated strength with domination, with the ability to crush one's enemies without hesitation. But now, as he looked into the eyes of the man who had led humanity to victory, he saw a different kind of strength, one that did not rely on fear or destruction. "You confuse mercy with weakness," Vyrek muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Hayes shook his head. "Mercy isn't weakness, Commander. It's a choice. One that requires courage. We could have destroyed you, yes. But what would that have accomplished? More death? More hatred? No. We chose to spare you because we believe in something greater than war." Vyrek leaned back, his gaze drifting to the small window in the cell. Beyond it, he could see the stars, their light cold and distant. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of doubt, not in humanity, but in himself. Far beyond Earth, in the heart of the galaxy, a gathering of immense significance was taking place. The Galactic Concord, a coalition of alien civilizations that had long maintained a fragile peace, convened in the grand halls of the Council of Stars. The chamber was a vast, circular space, its walls adorned with the symbols of countless species. Light poured in through crystalline domes, casting shifting patterns across the floor as if the stars themselves were watching. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy stood in their places, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from. There were the towering, crystalline beings of Lytheria, whose voices resonated like chimes in the wind. The insectoid queens of Hylax, their shimmering wings folded neatly behind them, clicked their mandibles in quiet discussion. The amphibian scholars of Relith floated in their tanks, their bulbous eyes blinking slowly. At the center of the chamber stood Ambassador Elena Torres, humanity's representative. She was a small figure compared to the towering forms around her, but her presence was anything but insignificant. Her voice, clear and unwavering, carried across the hall as she addressed the assembly. "Humanity has made mistakes," she began, her gaze sweeping across the gathered representatives. "We are not perfect. But we have learned. And we are willing to do what it takes to ensure peace, not just for ourselves, but for the galaxy as a whole." The room buzzed with murmurs, the alien delegates exchanging glances. Humanity's sudden emergence onto the galactic stage had been unexpected, their strength both feared and respected. But it was not their power that had brought them here, it was their choices. After hours of deliberation, the decision was made. Humanity was formally recognized as a protectorate of the galactic concord, entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining peace across the galaxy. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some species welcomed humanity's inclusion, seeing it as a chance for unity. Others remained wary, their distrust lingering like a shadow. As the session ended, Elena Torres stood outside the council chamber, gazing up at the endless expanse of stars. She felt the weight of her people's new role pressing down on her, but she also felt a spark of hope. Back on Earth, President Gray received the news with quiet resolve. Humanity had been given a chance to prove itself not as conquerors, but as protectors. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer alone. And as the galaxy watched, the descendants of Terra prepared to take their place among the stars, not as the architects of destruction, but as the stewards of a fragile, hopeful peace. The stars stretched endlessly, cold and distant, as humanity's fleets moved silently through the void. Their ships, sleek and formidable, were no longer instruments of destruction but symbols of vigilance. These vessels, once forged in the fires of desperation and survival, now glided through the galaxy with purpose. They were no longer harbingers of war but sentinels of peace. Across the galaxy, whispers of humanity's power spread like wildfire. The name Earth carried with it a weight that had not existed before, a name that spoke of resilience, of mercy, and of a strength that did not revel in conquest. But the galaxy also knew fear, for humanity's potential for destruction was undeniable. They were the sleeping giant that had awoken, and though its steps were measured, its shadow loomed large. Yet, humanity wielded this newfound power with restraint. Earth's fleets patrolled the stars, their presence a quiet reminder of the balance they now sought to maintain. On the outer rim of the galaxy, a distress call echoed through the dark, a mining colony under attack by rogue mercenaries. The cry for help was faint, almost lost in the vastness of space, but it did not go unheard. Within hours, a human ship arrived, its hull gleaming under the light of a dying star. The mercenaries, a ragtag group of opportunists, were no match for the disciplined precision of Earth's forces. But there was no bloodshed. Humanity's soldiers disarmed their foes with calculated efficiency, their weapons lowered once the threat was neutralized. The miners, a mix of alien species, emerged from their shelters cautiously. Their white eyes reflected both gratitude and disbelief. One of them, a frail being with translucent skin and trembling hands, approached the human commander. You came for us," they whispered, their voice quivering. The commander knelt, his face softening. "No one should face fear alone," he said simply. In another corner of the galaxy, a brewing conflict between two rival empires was extinguished before it could ignite. Earth's diplomats, escorted by their fleets, stood as mediators, their presence commanding respect. The two warring factions, once poised to tear each other apart, found themselves seated at the same table, their weapons replaced by words. Humanity's power was not just in its ships or its soldiers, it was in its choices. They had learned the cost of war, and now they sought to ensure others would not have to pay it. The galaxy watched, some with admiration, others with suspicion, as the sleeping giant continued to awaken, not with roars of conquest, but with the quiet strength of guardianship. 6 months passed, and the galaxy was no longer the same. The tides of history had shifted, and with them, the hearts of entire civilizations. Where once there had been hostility, there was now dialogue. Formerly aggressive empires, inspired by humanity's example, began to embrace diplomacy. The scars of old wars remained, but they were no longer wounds that festered, they were reminders of a past that no one wished to repeat. On Mars, the red sands shimmered under the pale light of a distant Sunday Ares station. Humanity's largest intergalactic hub stood as a beacon of progress and cooperation. Its towering spires reached toward the heavens, their surfaces alive with a glow of alien and human technology intertwined. Elena Marquez, a seasoned diplomat and one of Earth's leading voices in the galactic concord, stood on a balcony overlooking the docking bays. Below her, the scene was one of bustling activity. Ships of every shape and size, bearing the marks of countless alien civilizations, came and went. Their crews, humans and aliens alike, moved together in harmony, their differences forgotten in a shared purpose of exploration and peace. Elena's gaze lingered on a particularly large vessel, its hull adorned with the intricate carvings of the lithe Ryan archivists. As it docked, a group of towering, crystalline beings emerged, their forms glinting in the Martian sunlight. They were greeted not with fear, but with open arms. Beside her, a young aide hesitated before speaking. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" he said softly. "Just a year ago, we were fighting for our survival. Now, look at us." Elena smiled, her expression both wistful and proud. "We used to think we were alone," she said, her voice carrying a quiet reverence. "We looked up at the stars and saw only emptiness. Now, we know better. Now, we're the galaxy's guardians." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Humanity had risen from the ashes of its struggles, not as conquerors, but as protectors. They had proven that strength was not in domination, but in unity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Martian landscape in hues of crimson and gold, the galaxy continued to transform. On distant worlds, treaties were signed, alliances forged. The echoes of war grew fainter, replaced by the hum of cooperation. And yet, the road ahead was far from easy. Humanity's role as the galaxy's guardians was not a title to be taken lightly. It was a responsibility, one that required constant vigilance and unwavering resolve. But for the first time, the people of Earth and the countless beings who now called them allies looked to the future with hope. The stars above, once cold and indifferent, now seemed to shine a little brighter. And as alien ships continued to dock at Ares Station, their lights blending with the glow of humanity's creations, a new era began, a fragile, beautiful age of unity, born from the ashes of conflict and guided by the hands of those who dared to dream of something greater. And so, humanity, once overlooked and underestimated, rose to become the guardians of peace in a fractured galaxy. But what lies ahead? Can the lessons of unity and mercy stand against the inevitable challenges of the stars? Or will the darkness of the unknown test humanity's resolve once more? Tell us, what would you do if the fate of the galaxy rested in your hands? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the mysteries of the universe and the strength within us all. Until next time, dream big and look to the stars.